Part 1. The Eternal Question: Why We Wonder About Life After Death. Of all the great and profound questions that have echoed through the heart of the human species, none is more persistent, more personal, or more deeply and intimately woven into the fabric of our being than the question of what comes next. From the earliest burial rituals of our most ancient ancestors to the quiet, late-night thoughts of our own modern minds, humanity has been relentlessly haunted and profoundly captivated by the mystery of what lies beyond the final veil of death. We have explored the nature of reality, and we have explored the nature of the self. Now, we begin a new journey into the great and timeless human hope that our own personal reality and our own precious self may not have a final end. But before we can explore the great, imaginative answers to this question, we must first understand the question itself. Why? Why are we the one species on Earth that looks upon the fact of its own mortality and asks, with a voice of both terror and of hope, is this all there is? The first and most powerful engine that drives our inquiry into an afterlife is the great and primal force of fear. As we have explored, we are beings who are biologically programmed for survival, and we are beings who are psychologically defined by a unique and complex sense of our own individual self. Death, then, presents itself to us as the ultimate, twofold threat. It is the end of our biological existence, and it is the potential annihilation of the I that we have spent our entire lives building and cherishing. The question of life after death is, in its most basic form, a profound and courageous act of protest against this seeming annihilation. It is the I refusing to accept its own extinction. It is the mind's great rebellion against the silence of the void, the heart's defiant cry into the darkness, there must be something more. This fear is not just a fear of a future nothingness, it is also a fear that our present life, with all its struggles and its sorrows, might be ultimately meaningless. If this brief and often painful existence is all there is, if there is no final chapter in which the scales are balanced and the injustices of the world are made right, then our lives can feel like a cruel and absurd cosmic accident. The hope for an afterlife, for a realm where suffering is redeemed, where virtue is rewarded, and where a final and just meaning is revealed, is a powerful and necessary antidote to the existential despair that can arise from the contemplation of a purely finite and often unjust world. We wonder about what comes next because we have a deep and desperate need for our lives and our suffering to have mattered in some ultimate and enduring way. But our wonder is not fueled by fear alone. It is equally, and perhaps even more powerfully, fueled by the great and beautiful force of hope. This is the hope for a continuation and a completion of a story that feels, in this world, unfinished. Our lives are filled with a sense of boundless potential. There are always more books to read, more skills to master, more places to see, and more wisdom to gain than a single, short lifetime can possibly allow. The desire for an afterlife is the desire to see this great project of learning and of becoming through to a more complete and satisfying conclusion. It is the hope of the student who does not want the class to end before they have learned the final and most important lesson. The love that we feel for another person, for a partner, a parent, a child, a friend, is a force that feels more real, more true, and more eternal than the fragile, biological bodies that contain it. The idea that this profound, and almost sacred, bond can be completely and permanently severed by the mere, mechanical failure of a physical body feels like a kind of cosmic and intolerable injustice. We cannot bear to believe that the love and the consciousness that we knew in another person can be utterly and completely extinguished. And so we ask, is there life after death, because our own love refuses to believe in a final goodbye? We wonder if there is another place because we have a deep and desperate hope that we will, one day, see them again. Finally, we wonder about life after death because our minds have a deep and fundamental need to fill in the great, blank spaces on our map of reality. Death is the ultimate unknown, the one great territory from which no traveler has ever returned with a reliable report. It is a great and silent void in our understanding. And the human mind, as we have seen, abhors a vacuum. We are storytelling and meaning-making creatures. Faced with the great and silent question mark of what comes after our end, we have an irresistible and creative urge to write a story upon that blank page, to draw a map, however speculative, of that great, uncharted land. The very act of wondering about an afterlife is the beginning of this creative and necessary human project. It is our refusal to live with a final and absolute void at the very center of our understanding of our own ultimate destiny. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, feel these great and ancient human longings within your own heart. Feel the fear of the unknown that makes you seek a light in the darkness. Feel the hope for completion that makes you wish for your story to continue. And feel the profound and powerful love for others that makes you long for an eternal connection. These are not signs of weakness or of delusion. They are the deepest and most noble expressions of what it means to be a conscious, a loving, and a meaning-seeking human being. Rest in the profound and universal dignity of the question itself. Having felt the deep and primal human needs that give birth to the eternal question of an afterlife, the powerful currents of our fear, our hope, and our profound and enduring love, we can now turn our attention from the question itself to the magnificent and varied answers that humanity has created in response. Faced with the great and silent mystery of what comes next, we have not remained silent. We have answered with story, with myth, with ritual, and with faith. These great narratives of what lies beyond death are not just speculative theories. They are some of the most powerful and enduring creations of the human spirit, a testament to our relentless search for meaning and for hope in the face of the ultimate unknown. The first, and perhaps most ancient and widespread, of these great answers is the story of the soul's journey. This is the narrative that proposes that our conscious, individual self, our soul, survives the death of the body and embarks on a great and final voyage to another realm of existence. This is a story that has been told in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different cultures, but its core, archetypal features remain remarkably consistent. There is often a sense of passage, a journey across a great, dividing barrier, like the river Styx in Greek mythology. And at the end of this journey, there is a moment of reckoning, a final judgment where the deeds of our earthly life are weighed in a great and cosmic scale. And from this judgment, the soul is sent to its final and eternal destination, a place of either blissful reward or a profound and sorrowful punishment. This powerful and enduring narrative speaks directly to some of our deepest human needs. It is a direct and powerful antidote to our fear of annihilation, for it promises not just the survival, but the eternal persistence of our unique and precious individual self. It is an answer to our deep and innate longing for justice, for it assures us that the moral arc of the universe is a long one, but that it bends, in the end, towards a final and perfect reckoning. And it is an answer to our hope for reunion, for these otherworldly realms are almost always imagined as a place where we will be reunited with the loved ones who have gone before us. This is the great and hopeful story of a linear continuation, the belief that our life is a single, precious story, and that death is not its end, but the beginning of its final and most important chapter. A second great and equally powerful answer, one that has been the spiritual foundation for billions of people, particularly in the Eastern world, is the story of the returning self. This is the narrative of reincarnation. In this view, death is not a journey to a permanent, final destination, but is, instead, one turn in a great and continuous cycle of birth, death, and of rebirth. This is the concept of samsara, the great wheel of life. In this story, the essential part of our being, our soul, or our stream of consciousness, is not extinguished at death, but is reborn into a new body, a new life, to continue its long and arduous journey of learning and of evolution. This narrative of a cyclical continuation offers a different kind of comfort and a different kind of meaning. It speaks to our deep hope for completion, not by promising an eternal reward, but by giving us a seemingly infinite number of chances to get it right. It is the story of a great and compassionate cosmic school, where the soul is sent back, lifetime after lifetime, to learn the lessons it needs for its ultimate liberation. This view also provides a powerful and coherent explanation for the seemingly random and unjust suffering of the world. The circumstances of our present life, in this view, are not an accident, but are the direct result of the actions and the choices of our past lives, a concept known as karma. And the way we live this life, the compassion we show, and the wisdom we cultivate will directly shape the nature of the lives that are yet to come. The goal is not to win the game in a single lifetime, but to patiently, virtuously, and lovingly continue the great and sacred work of our own long and unfolding spiritual journey. A third great answer, one that is perhaps more modern and more secular, is the story of an enduring legacy. This is a narrative that finds our immortality not in a transcendent, otherworldly realm, but in the tangible and continuing reality of this world. In this view, we live on beyond our physical death through the ripples of our influence, through the children we have raised, through the creative work we have left behind, and through the memories that we have planted in the hearts and the minds of our community. Our afterlife is the continuation of our story as it is told by others. This is a form of social immortality. It is a story that speaks directly to our profound sense of connection to the human family. It offers a form of continuity that is grounded, that is real, and that places the ultimate meaning of our lives not in our own personal salvation, but in our selfless and loving contribution to the world that we will one day leave behind. These three great stories, of the soul's final journey, of the soul's long return, and of the soul's enduring legacy, are the magnificent and beautiful ways that humanity has chosen to fill the great and silent space of the unknown. They are a testament to the creative and meaning-making power of the human heart in the face of its own final dissolution. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, see these great and ancient stories not as competing and mutually exclusive claims that must be proven or disproven. See them, instead, as a rich and beautiful tapestry of human hope. See them as a profound expression of our most deeply held values, the value of the individual soul, of ultimate justice, of spiritual growth, and of our deep and enduring love for one another. Rest in the profound and peaceful knowledge that the greatest and most beautiful truth may not be in the final, certain answer, but in the love, the hope, and the deep and timeless wonder that has inspired the question for all of human history. Part 2: Ancient Beliefs: How Early Cultures Imagined the Afterlife. The great and enduring human question of what lies beyond the veil of death is not a modern inquiry. It is a question that is as old as human consciousness itself, a mystery that has been answered not with scientific theories or philosophical proofs, but with the powerful and evocative language of myth and of story. To journey back in time, to the great, foundational civilizations of our world, is to discover a rich and varied landscape of belief about the soul's final destination. These are the first maps that humanity ever drew of that great, uncharted territory. Tonight, we will begin our journey with two of the oldest of these maps, those of the great river civilizations of Mesopotamia and of Egypt. In the ancient and sun-drenched land of Egypt, the afterlife was not a peripheral concern, it was the central, organizing principle of their entire civilization. The great pyramids that still stand today are not just tombs, they are magnificent and eternal launching pads for the soul's journey into the next world. The Egyptians saw this life not as the main event, but as a brief and often difficult preparation for a perfect and eternal existence that was to follow. Their relationship with death was not one of terrified denial, but of meticulous, lifelong, and hopeful preparation. They believed that the soul was a complex entity, composed of several parts. The two most important were the Ka, the vital life force that was a kind of spiritual double of the person, and the Ba, which was the unique personality and character of the individual, often depicted as a human-headed bird. At the moment of death, these parts of the soul were separated from the body, and the Ba began a perilous and difficult journey through the underworld, a complex and dangerous realm known as the Duat. To navigate the many gates, the monstrous demons, and the terrifying challenges of this journey, the deceased was equipped with a guidebook, a collection of magical spells and incantations that we now call the Book of the Dead. The entire journey of the soul culminated in the great and final judgment, a dramatic scene in the Hall of Two Truths before the god Osiris and 42 other divine judges. Here, the heart of the deceased was weighed on a great, golden scale against a single, pure, white feather, the feather of the goddess Maat, who represented truth, justice, and cosmic order. The deceased had to make a negative confession, declaring to the gods all of the evil deeds they had not committed in their lifetime. If the heart, heavy with sin and wrongdoing, were to outweigh the feather, it would be devoured by a terrifying monster named Ammit, a hybrid of a crocodile, a lion, and a hippopotamus. This was the ultimate and most terrifying end, a second and final death of the soul itself. But if the heart was found to be as light and as pure as the feather, the deceased was declared true of voice and was granted passage into the paradise of the afterlife, a beautiful and perfect world known as the Field of Reeds. The Field of Reeds was not a disembodied, spiritual heaven. It was an idealized and perfect reflection of the fertile and beautiful Nile Valley that the Egyptians so loved. It was a land where the sun always shone, where the crops grew with an impossible abundance, and where one could enjoy all the simple and beautiful pleasures of life, of feasting, of family, of love, but without any of the pain, the sickness, the sorrow, or the hard labor of the mortal world. The Egyptian vision of the afterlife, then, was one of a hopeful and idealized continuation, a testament to a culture that so deeply loved the goodness of life that their greatest hope was for it to continue, in a perfected form, forever. If we journey from the Nile Valley to the land between the two rivers, to the great and ancient civilizations of Mesopotamia, we find a vision of the afterlife that is, in almost every way, its dark and gloomy opposite. The Mesopotamian worldview was a profoundly pessimistic one. Their gods were often seen as fickle and unpredictable, and their lives were lived in the shadow of a sense of cosmic uncertainty. This pessimism was reflected in their grim and joyless vision of what came after death. For the ancient Sumerians, the Babylonians, and the Assyrians, there was no great judgment based on one's moral deeds. There was no beautiful field of reeds awaiting the virtuous. There was only one, single, and inescapable destination for all mortals, whether they were a great king or a humble servant, whether they had been good or evil in their lives. This was the underworld, a place they called Kur, the land of no return. It was a dark, dry, and dusty realm, a city of the dead that was located deep beneath the surface of the earth. The souls of the dead existed in this world as pale and listless shadows of their former selves, as thirsty and hungry spirits, clad in feathers like birds, who spent their eternity in a state of dim and sorrowful gloom. The great and defining tragedy of the Mesopotamian afterlife was not punishment, but a profound and eternal boredom, an endless and gray continuation that was stripped of all the light, the color, and the joy of life. This bleak and tragic vision is most powerfully and beautifully expressed in the world's first great work of literature, the Epic of Gilgamesh. The great hero, Gilgamesh, is forced to confront the reality of death when his beloved friend, Enkidu, dies. He is so consumed by grief, and by the terror of his own, similar fate, that he embarks on a great and epic quest to find the secret of eternal life. His journey takes him to the very ends of the earth, but in the end, he fails. He returns home, having learned the great and somber lesson of his culture, that immortality is for the gods alone. The only immortality that a mortal can hope for is to be remembered for the great deeds they have done and the great works they have built, and the only wisdom is to accept one's mortal fate and to find joy in the simple, fleeting, and precious pleasures of the one, beautiful, and finite life that we are given. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, consider these two ancient and powerful visions of what lies beyond. See in the Egyptian hope a testament to the human heart's deep and enduring desire for justice, for meaning, and for the continuation of life's beauty. And see in the Mesopotamian despair a profound and honest recognition of the tragedy of loss, and a call to find our meaning and our joy not in a distant and imagined future, but in the precious and very real moments of the here and now. Rest in the knowledge that you are a part of a great, human family that has been asking these same, deep questions, and telling these same, powerful stories, since the very dawn of civilization. Having journeyed through the stark and opposing landscapes of the ancient Near East, the sunlit, orderly, and hopeful paradise of the Egyptian Field of Reeds and the deep, dusty, and joyless despair of the Mesopotamian land of no return, we now turn our gaze westward to the brilliant and turbulent world of the ancient Greeks. Here, in the birthplace of Western philosophy, of drama, and of democracy, we find not a single, unified vision of the afterlife, but a rich, complex, and often contradictory tapestry of myth and of belief, a world that contains within it both the deepest and most profound shadows and the most brilliant and beautiful light. The oldest and most influential of the Greek visions of the afterlife is the one that is laid out for us in the great and ancient epics of Homer. In the Odyssey, the hero Odysseus must make a terrifying journey to the very edge of the world, to the dark and misty land of the Cimmerians, where he performs a ritual to summon the spirits of the dead from the underworld, the realm of Hades. The world that he encounters is not a place of fiery torment or of blissful reward. It is, much like the Mesopotamian vision, a profoundly bleak and miserable one. The Homeric Hades is a dim, joyless, and shadowy kingdom, a place of dust and of darkness, where the souls of the dead exist as weak, witless, and gibbering phantoms. They are shades, pale and insubstantial echoes of their former, living selves, who have no memory and no strength until they are momentarily revived by drinking the blood of a sacrificed animal. The most powerful and poignant expression of this worldview comes in the famous and heartbreaking words spoken by the ghost of the great hero Achilles, the most glorious of all the Greek warriors. When Odysseus tries to comfort him by telling him that he must be a great king even among the dead, Achilles' reply is a stark and absolute refutation of any glory in death. "Do not speak to me soothingly of death, glorious Odysseus," he says. "I would rather be a slave on earth to the poorest of all landless masters, than to be the king over all these perished dead." This is the ultimate testament to the profound Greek love for the vibrant, sunlit, and tangible world of the living. Life, even a life of the meanest and most difficult servitude, was seen as infinitely preferable to the greatest honors in the pale and sorrowful kingdom of the dead. But this early, gloomy vision of a universal and undifferentiated underworld was not the final word for the Greeks. As their culture evolved, and as they were influenced by new religious and philosophical ideas, their vision of the afterlife grew more complex and, for some, more hopeful. The idea of a great, moral judgment after death began to take root. The souls of the dead were now said to be brought before a panel of three wise judges, Minos, Rhadamanthus, and Aeacus, who would examine the deeds of their past life and assign them to their proper, final destination. For those who had lived a life of great and unforgivable wickedness, and particularly for those who had shown a profound hubris or arrogance towards the gods, there was a special place of eternal punishment, a deep and dark pit in the underworld known as Tartarus. This was a place of specific, ingenious, and eternal torments, designed to fit the nature of the sinner's crime. It was here that King Tantalus was condemned to stand forever in a pool of water that receded whenever he tried to drink, and under a fruit tree whose branches pulled away whenever he reached for them, a state of eternal, unquenchable hunger and thirst. And it was here that King Sisyphus was condemned to his famous, futile, and eternal labor of pushing a great boulder up a mountain, only to have it roll back down again each time he neared the summit. On the other side of this moral divide, for the great heroes, for the virtuous, and for those who were especially beloved by the gods, there was a place of eternal bliss. This was the Elysian Fields, or the Isles of the Blessed. This was a paradise that was, in many ways, similar to the Egyptian field of reeds. It was a beautiful and peaceful land, where the sun always shone, where the heroes could spend their eternity in joyful, athletic pursuits, in conversation, and in feasting, free from all sorrow and all pain. And so, the Greek afterlife evolved from a single, gloomy destination for all, to a complex moral landscape, with different realms for the wicked and for the good. But the final, and most profound, layer of this vision was added by the great philosophers, and particularly by Plato. Influenced by the mystical traditions of the Orphics and the Pythagoreans, Plato introduced the idea of the transmigration of the soul, or reincarnation. For Plato, the afterlife was not a final, eternal destination. It was, instead, a temporary and educational interlude in the soul's long and multi-life journey. After death, he taught, the soul would be judged. The virtuous soul would be rewarded with a period of 1,000 years of blissful contemplation in a heavenly realm, where it could gaze upon the perfect and eternal forms. And the wicked soul would be sent for 1,000 years to an underworld of punishment and of purification. But at the end of this period, both souls would be brought back to be reborn into a new, mortal life. The ultimate goal, for Plato, was to live a life of such pure, philosophical virtue that the soul could finally be liberated from this endless cycle of birth and of death, and could return, at last, to its true, eternal, and divine home in the world of the forms. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, see in these three great and ancient civilizations, in the hope of the Egyptians, in the despair of the Mesopotamians, and in the rich and complex moral drama of the Greeks, a profound and enduring reflection of our own, most human hopes and fears. Rest in the knowledge that you are a part of a great and ancient family that has, for millennia, looked into the great and silent mystery of its own end, and has answered it with a rich and beautiful tapestry of powerful, meaningful, and enduring stories. Part 3: Eastern Philosophies, Reincarnation and the Cycle of Life. Our journey into the ancient beliefs about the afterlife has so far taken us through the great civilizations of the Mediterranean and the Near East. We have seen the Egyptian hope for an idealized, eternal paradise, the Mesopotamian despair of a bleak and shadowy underworld, and the complex, moral drama of the Greek realm of Hades. And yet, all of these powerful visions share a common, underlying structure: the idea that we live one, single, earthly life, which is then followed by a single, permanent, and eternal afterlife. But if we turn our gaze from these ancient Western lands to the deep, contemplative, and philosophical traditions of ancient India, we discover a completely different and profoundly radical map of our soul's great journey. This is a vision that sees our one, human life not as the entire play, but as a single, fleeting scene in a much grander, more ancient, and ever-repeating cosmic drama. The great cycle of reincarnation. At the very heart of the great spiritual traditions that were born in India, including Hinduism and Buddhism, lies the concept of samsara. Samsara is often translated as the cycle of life, but it is a concept far deeper and more vast than this simple phrase implies. It is the vision of a great, beginningless, and seemingly endless ocean of existence, a world of perpetual and cyclical wandering. In this view, all living beings, from the smallest and most insignificant insect to the human being, and even to the great gods, or devas, in the heavenly realms, are caught in this great and ever-turning wheel of birth, of death, and of rebirth. Our present life is not our first, and it will not be our last. It is simply one of countless lifetimes that we have already lived, and one of countless lifetimes that we may yet have to live. Death, in this worldview, is not a final destination. It is a brief and temporary interlude, a moment of transition where the soul, or the stream of consciousness, leaves one worn-out body and is drawn, by the force of its own past actions, to be reborn into a new one. But what is the great and powerful engine that keeps this immense and ancient wheel of samsara turning? The answer, in these traditions, is the force of karma. Karma is a concept that is often misunderstood in the modern world as a simple system of cosmic reward and punishment. But in its purest form, it is a much more subtle and profound idea. It is a universal, natural, and impersonal law of moral cause and effect, as real and as inescapable as the law of gravity. The word karma literally means action, and the law of karma states that every intentional action that we perform, whether it is an action of the body, of speech, or of the mind, plants a kind of psychic seed. And this seed, when the conditions are right, will inevitably ripen and bear its corresponding fruit, either later in this life or in a future one. This powerful and elegant law provides a comprehensive and coherent answer to the great and painful question of suffering and of injustice. From the perspective of a single lifetime, the world can often seem a random, cruel, and unfair place, where good people suffer and wicked people prosper. But from the vast, multi-life perspective of karma, there are no accidents. The circumstances of our present life, the family we are born into, our physical health, our innate talents, our worldly fortunes, and our personal struggles, are not the result of random chance or the whim of a distant god. They are the direct and inevitable result of the karmic seeds that we ourselves have planted with our own actions in our own, forgotten past lives. This is a worldview that at once carries a heavy burden and a profound and liberating sense of empowerment. On the one hand, it places the ultimate and final responsibility for all of our own suffering squarely upon our own shoulders. But on the other hand, it means that we are, in every moment, the absolute and sovereign masters of our own future destiny. We are not the helpless victims of a random universe. The choices we make, the kindness we show, the compassion we cultivate, and the wisdom we develop in this present moment are actively planting the seeds for a better and a more fortunate future. We are, in a very real sense, creating the person we will become and the world we will be reborn into with our every thought, our every word, and our every deed. The great and lifelong task of a human being, within this worldview, is to live in accordance with Dharma. Dharma is a rich and complex word that can be translated as one's sacred duty, one's righteous path, or one's unique and proper role in the great cosmic order. To live in accordance with one's Dharma is to live a life of virtue, of compassion, and of selflessness, and in doing so, to create good karma and to move our soul forward on its long, evolutionary journey. And the ultimate goal of this great and multi-life journey is moksha, or liberation. Moksha is the final release from the great and often suffering wheel of samsara. It is the end of the long and weary journey of the individual soul. In the Hindu tradition of the Vedanta, this is the moment of the great and final waking up, the moment when the individual soul, the Atman, realizes its true and eternal nature and understands that it is, and always has been, one with the great, universal, and divine reality of Brahman. It is the moment the drop of water returns, at last, to the boundless and peaceful ocean. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, consider your own life from this vast and ancient perspective. See your present circumstances not as a random accident, but as the fruit of a long and forgotten history. And see your present choices, your acts of kindness and of anger, not as fleeting and insignificant moments, but as the powerful and potent seeds from which your own, unknown future will grow. Rest in the profound and solemn responsibility, and the deep and empowering freedom, of being the sole and sacred author of your own, long, and unfolding cosmic destiny. The great and ancient Indian worldview of a soul, an Atman, journeying through the endless and repeating cycle of samsara, its path governed by the unerring and impersonal law of karma, was the rich and fertile philosophical soil from which a new and revolutionary spiritual path would grow. The historical Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, was born into this world of thought. He accepted its basic and powerful framework of a multi-life journey and of a moral law of cause and effect. But he, through his own deep, direct, and radical introspection into the nature of his own mind, would challenge and transform this ancient tradition, offering a new, and in many ways, a more psychological and more pragmatic path to liberation. The great and foundational point of departure between the Hindu and the Buddhist vision of this great cycle lies in the answer to a single, crucial question: what, exactly, is the self that is being reborn? The Hindu tradition, as we have seen, answers with the concept of the Atman, an eternal, unchanging, and essential soul, a spark of the divine that is the true and enduring core of our being. The Buddha, however, when he looked inward with the clear and focused light of his own, meditative awareness, could find no evidence for such a permanent and independent entity. This led him to his most radical and most challenging teaching, the doctrine of anatta, or no self. If there is no unchanging soul, no essential I that persists from one moment to the next, let alone from one life to the next, then what is it that is reborn? How can the process of reincarnation work without a soul to be reincarnated? The classic Buddhist analogy that is used to explain this is that of a single flame being used to light a new candle. The flame on the second candle is not the same, identical flame as the one on the first candle. And yet, it is not completely different either. There is a direct and undeniable causal link, a transference of energy and of condition from one to the other. So it is with rebirth. What is reborn, in the Buddhist view, is not a solid and unchanging soul, but a stream of consciousness, a flowing and interdependent series of causes and effects. The unresolved karmic energies, the mental habits, and the deep, underlying tendencies of one life create the causal conditions for the arising of a new one. It is a rebirth of a process, not of a person. This subtle but profound shift in understanding also leads to a different emphasis in the understanding of karma. While the Hindu view sees karma as the great, cosmic law that governs the soul's long journey, the Buddhist teaching focused with an intense and psychological precision on the root of karma in our own minds. For the Buddha, the most important aspect of any action was not the external act itself, but the internal intention, or cetana, that motivated it. The karmic seeds that we are constantly planting are the seeds of our own mental and emotional states. Every action that is born from a state of greed, of hatred, or of delusion plants a seed of future suffering. And every action that is born from a state of generosity, of loving kindness, and of wisdom plants a seed of future peace and of happiness. The great wheel of samsara is not a cosmic mechanism that is happening to us. It is a psychological process that is being actively and constantly generated, moment by moment, by the quality of our own conscious intentions. And if the cause of the cycle is a psychological one, then the goal, the final liberation, must also be a psychological state. The ultimate aim of the Buddhist path is nirvana. The word literally means to extinguish or to blow out, as one would blow out a candle flame. What is extinguished in this state is not the self, for there is no solid self to be extinguished. What is extinguished are the three fires. The fires of greed, of hatred, and of ignorance, that are the very fuel that keeps the suffering field wheel of samsara turning. Nirvana is not a heavenly place that one goes to after death. It is a state of profound and radical peace, of unshakable freedom, and of ultimate wisdom that can be realized right here, in this very life. It is the end of the journey not because the soul has arrived at its final home, but because the traveler has finally awakened to the fact that the journey itself was a dream. And so, the great Eastern philosophies offer us two related, but profoundly different visions of our soul's journey. The Hindu path of Vedanta is, in its essence, a metaphysical one. It tells us that our problem is one of ignorance. Our eternal, divine soul has forgotten its true nature, and our task is to remember our ultimate identity with the great, universal being of Brahman. The Buddhist path is, in its essence, a psychological one. It tells us that our problem is one of clinging. We suffer because we are clinging to a false and illusory idea of a permanent self, and our task is to let go of this clinging and to extinguish the inner fires of our own craving. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, see in these ancient and powerful Eastern philosophies not a set of strange or exotic beliefs, but a profound and deeply practical map of your own inner world. See your own life not as a single and isolated event, but as a part of a much longer and more mysterious journey. And see your own thoughts and your own intentions not as fleeting and insignificant moments, but as the powerful and precious seeds from which your own future reality is being born. Rest in the profound and peaceful knowledge that you are not a helpless victim of your fate, but that you hold, in the palm of your own hand, in the quality of your own present moment awareness, the very key to your own ultimate liberation. Part 4. Western Religions, Heaven, Hell, and Eternal Judgment. Having journeyed through the great, cyclical, and multi-life landscapes of the Eastern philosophical traditions, with their concepts of karma and of reincarnation, we now turn our gaze back to the West. Here, in the great, monotheistic religions of Christianity and Islam, we find a profoundly different and equally powerful map of the soul's ultimate destiny. This is not a story of an endless, repeating cycle of birth and of death. It is a story that is, in its very essence, linear. It is the story of a single, precious, and unrepeatable human life, a great and singular journey that moves from a definite beginning to a definite end, which is then followed by a final, absolute, and eternal judgment. At the very heart of this Western religious vision is the concept of a unique, individual, and enduring soul. Unlike the Buddhist doctrine of no-self, or the Hindu idea of the individual Atman ultimately merging with the universal Brahman, the soul in the Abrahamic traditions is seen as a distinct and personal creation of God. Your soul is the very core of your being, the seat of your consciousness, your free will, and your moral responsibility. And this soul, this essential, retains its unique and individual identity not just throughout this one, mortal life, but for all of eternity. This belief places an immense and profound weight upon the life that we are living right now. In a worldview without reincarnation, there are no second chances, no future lifetimes in which to correct the mistakes of our past. This one, brief, and fleeting life is the single and definitive test of the soul's character, the one and only opportunity we have to choose our final and everlasting destiny. This singular life is understood as a profound and sacred gift from a loving and a just God.
But it is also a time of great moral trial. The world is seen as a stage upon which a great and cosmic drama of good and evil is being played out, and we, as human beings, are the central actors in this drama. We have been endowed with the gift of free will, the capacity to choose between obedience to God's laws and the selfish temptations of our own, fallen nature. Our every action, our every word, and our every thought is seen as having a deep and enduring moral significance.
This great and singular life journey culminates in the central and most dramatic event in this entire cosmic story, the Day of Judgment. These traditions teach that at the end of time, all who have ever lived will be resurrected, and they will be brought to stand before God for a final and absolute reckoning. This is the moment when the scales of justice are balanced, when the moral account of every single human life is settled. It is a vision of a universe that is not, in the end, morally neutral, but is governed by a profound and ultimate justice. The deeds of our lives, both the good and the bad, are not forgotten. They are recorded in a great, cosmic book, and on this final day, the book will be opened. The criterion for this ultimate judgment is a complex and beautiful combination of both faith and of works. It is a matter of one's inner belief, the faith and the trust and the surrender to God, and it is also a matter of one's outer actions, the compassion one has shown to the poor and the suffering, the justice one has practiced, and the love one has shown to one's neighbor. In this great and final moment of truth, the soul is laid bare, and its true and essential character is revealed. From this great and final judgment, the soul is then sent to its eternal and unchanging destination. The path of human destiny, in this view, is a path that ultimately forks into two, and only two, final and everlasting realities. For those who have lived a life of faith and of righteousness, the path leads to an eternity of blissful communion with God. For those who have rejected God and have lived a life of sin and of wickedness, the path leads to an eternity of separation from that divine source. These are the two great and ultimate possibilities that stand at the end of the Western religious journey, the profound and beautiful promise of heaven and the dark and terrifying specter of hell. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, consider the profound and solemn weight of this grand, linear, and moral vision of our existence. See your own, individual life not as a fleeting and random accident, but as a single, precious, and unrepeatable story, a sacred pilgrimage with a beginning, a middle, and a final, and eternally significant end. Feel the deep and powerful sense of moral responsibility that this worldview inspires, the knowledge that your every, small choice between kindness and cruelty, between selfishness and selflessness, echoes in eternity. Rest in the profound and sobering mystery of this great and ancient story, a story that gives to our one, brief, and mortal life the weight and the substance of an everlasting and ultimate meaning. Having stood before the great and final assize, the moment of ultimate moral reckoning where the deeds of a single, precious life are weighed in the divine scales, the soul, in the great Western religious traditions of Christianity and Islam, is set upon one of two, final, and everlasting paths. These are the ultimate destinations that have for millennia captured, and often terrified, the human imagination. They are the radiant and blissful promise of heaven, and the dark and sorrowful despair of hell. These are not just places, but are the final and ultimate states of being, the two great and eternal answers to the question of a life well lived. The vision of heaven, in its deepest and most profound theological sense, is far more than the popular and often childlike image of a beautiful garden, of angels with harps, or of a great and eternal feast. While these images are used to give us a sensory hint of its nature, the true essence of heaven is something that is believed to be beyond our earthly comprehension. The ultimate and final joy of heaven, in the Christian tradition, is what is known as the beatific vision. It is the soul's direct, unmediated, and blissful experience of being in the full and glorious presence of God. It is the end of all longing, the satisfaction of all desire, and the final fulfillment of the human heart's deepest and most ancient yearning for ultimate truth, for absolute goodness, and for perfect beauty. It is a state of pure, ecstatic, and unending love. In the Islamic tradition, the paradise of Jannah is often described with a richer and more vivid sensory palette, as a magnificent garden of eternal delight, with rivers of pure water, of milk, and of wine, with abundant and delicious fruits, and with beautiful and pure companions. But here too, the ultimate and most profound reward, the one that surpasses all of these physical pleasures, is the joy of being in the presence of God, of seeing the face of Allah. It is to exist in a state of ultimate and perfect peace, or salam, a state of complete and total contentment where there is no more sorrow, no more fear, and no more pain. In both traditions, heaven is also a place of profound and loving community. It is the great and final reunion, the place where all the painful and temporary separations of earthly life are healed, and where the righteous are joined together in a great, eternal, and loving family. On the other side of this great, cosmic divide lies the dark and terrifying possibility of hell. The traditional and popular image of hell is a place of eternal, physical torment, a fiery pit of unimaginable and unending punishment. And this image has served for centuries as a powerful and terrifying deterrent against the life of sin. And yet, many modern and ancient theologians, from both the Christian and the Islamic traditions, have come to see hell in a different, and in some ways, an even more profound and more terrifying light. In this more psychological and spiritual understanding, hell is not a place of active, divine punishment that is inflicted upon a person from the outside. It is, instead, the soul's own, self-chosen, and eternal state of separation from God. In this view, God is the source of all that is good, all that is joyful, all that is loving, and all that is real. To be in communion with God is to be in a state of life and of love. To be eternally and completely separated from that source, by one's own, free and final choice, is, by its very definition, to be in a state of ultimate despair, of absolute emptiness, and of profound and unending loneliness. The great writer C.S. Lewis famously wrote that the doors of hell are locked on the inside. It is not a prison that God throws us into. It is the prison of our own, unredeemed and utterly self-obsessed ego, a prison that the soul has chosen for itself and has refused to leave. The fire of hell, in this view, is the fire of one's own, unquenched and frustrated desire, the rage of a self that has chosen to be its own, small, and lonely God, and now must endure that choice for all of eternity. This stark and binary vision of our ultimate destiny, with its two, final, and mutually exclusive destinations, gives the moral choices of our one, earthly life an almost unimaginable significance. It tells us that our actions are not just fleeting and temporary events, but are acts that have eternal and everlasting consequences. This worldview is a powerful and profound testament to the reality of human free will. It is a story that insists that we are the true and final authors of our own, ultimate destiny. God, in this view, does not compel us to love. We are given the genuine, the awesome, and the terrifying freedom to choose our own, final home, to choose a life of loving communion with the source of all being, or to choose a life of proud and lonely separation from it. As you drift now into the quiet and healing space of sleep, see in these ancient and powerful visions of heaven and of hell not just a literal map of a future world, but a profound and symbolic mirror of our own, inner possibilities. Heaven is the state of a soul that is open, that is loving, that is connected, and that is in a state of graceful surrender to a reality that is greater than itself. Hell is the state of a soul that is closed, that is locked in on itself, that is a prisoner of its own pride and of its own fear. The great and urgent task of this one life, then, is to choose, in every moment, the direction in which we wish to travel. Rest in the profound and solemn mystery of a life that is imbued with such a deep, such a powerful, and such an eternal, moral meaning. Part 5. Philosophical Perspectives. Can the soul exist without the body? Our journey into the great mystery of life after death has so far taken us through the rich and varied landscapes of myth and of religion. We have explored the ancient visions of the afterlife and the great, theological frameworks of heaven, of hell, and of eternal judgment. But beneath all of these powerful and enduring stories lies a single, foundational, and profoundly philosophical question, a question upon which all hope for an afterlife must ultimately rest. Is the core of our being, our consciousness, our soul, a thing that is so inextricably bound to our physical body that it must perish when the body perishes? Or is it a different kind of reality, a non-physical and perhaps immortal essence that can, and does, exist independently of its temporary, biological home? The first, and perhaps most powerful and influential, Yes, to this question in the history of Western thought was given to us by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. For Plato, this was not just a possibility, it was a certainty, a conclusion he reached through the power of pure, philosophical reason. His entire worldview was built upon a fundamental dualism, a belief in two distinct and separate realms of reality. There was the physical world that we perceive with our senses, a world of constant change, of imperfection, and of decay. And then there was a higher, more real, and more true world, a transcendent and eternal realm of perfect ideas, or forms. This dualism in his vision of the cosmos was mirrored in his vision of the human being. The body, for Plato, belongs entirely to the lower, physical world. It is a composite, perishable, and ultimately flawed thing, a temporary prison that ensnares our true self. Our true self, our soul, is not from this world. It is an immortal, non-physical, and eternal entity whose true and proper home is the higher, transcendent realm of the forms. The soul, in this view, is not just a part of us, it is who we are. Plato offered several powerful arguments for the soul's independence from the body. One of the most beautiful is his theory of knowledge as recollection. He argued that when we learn a deep, abstract truth, such as a timeless mathematical theorem or a profound moral principle, we are not, in fact, learning it for the first time. The physical world of the senses, he believed, is too imperfect to be the source of our knowledge of perfection. Instead, he proposed that our immortal soul, before it was born into our body, existed in the realm of the forms and had direct knowledge of these perfect and eternal truths. The process of learning, then, is actually a process of remembering, of recollecting the pure knowledge that our soul possessed before it was clouded and confused by its union with a physical body. If our soul existed and held knowledge before it was in the body, Plato argued, then it must also be able to exist after the body is gone. Another of his arguments was from the soul's very nature. The body, like all physical things, is composite. It is made of many different parts. And anything that is made of parts can be broken apart, can be dissolved, can be destroyed. But the soul, the conscious and thinking I, is a simple, single, and indivisible entity. You cannot have half of a soul or a piece of a consciousness. And if the soul is a simple and indivisible thing, then it cannot, by its very nature, be broken apart or destroyed. It must, therefore, be immortal. More than 2,000 years later, the French philosopher René Descartes would arrive at a strikingly similar conclusion through his own, modern, and equally powerful path of reason. As we have explored, Descartes' great project was to find a single, unshakable point of certainty in a world of doubt. He found this certainty in the famous declaration, "I think, therefore I am." But it is what he concluded from this that is so crucial to our present question. He had proven to himself that he existed as a thinking thing, a consciousness. And he argued that this thinking thing was entirely separate and distinct from his physical body. His argument, like Plato's, rested on the idea of their different and incompatible properties. He reasoned that the most essential attribute of the body is that it is extended in space. It has a size, a shape, and it can be divided into smaller and smaller pieces. But the mind, or the soul, he argued, has no such properties. It has no size, no shape, and it cannot be divided. It is a single, unified, and unextended substance. And since the mind and the body have these two, completely different, and mutually exclusive essential properties, they must be two, completely different, and separate substances. The I, the thinking self, is a non-physical soul, and the body is a separate, physical machine that this soul, for a time, inhabits and controls. If the soul and the body are two distinct and independent things, then the death and the decomposition of the physical body does not logically imply the death of the non-physical soul. The ghost, in this view, can, and does, survive the breaking of the machine. These two great, dualist visions, from Plato and from Descartes, have provided the deep, philosophical, and rational foundation for the belief in an afterlife that has so profoundly shaped our world. They are a powerful and elegant testament to the human mind's ability to reason its way to a reality that lies beyond the limits of our physical senses. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, consider the deep and ancient intuition that you are more than just your physical body. Feel the part of you that thinks, that feels, that hopes, that dreams. Is this feeling, this sense of an inner, conscious self, merely a product of the body's complex machinery? Or is it, as these great thinkers have argued, something more? Is it the echo of a higher, and perhaps eternal, reality? Rest in the profound and peaceful mystery of being both a finite, physical body, and at the very same time, a seemingly infinite and boundless, conscious mind. The great, rationalist visions of Plato and of Descartes, which present the soul as a distinct, non-physical, and immortal substance that is separate from the body, have offered a powerful and enduring source of hope for millennia. They give us an image of our true self as an eternal and indestructible being, a traveler who is merely and temporarily passing through this fragile, physical world. And yet, the rise of the modern, scientific worldview, and the continued development of philosophy in its wake, has presented a series of profound and formidable challenges to this dualist picture, challenges that have led many modern thinkers to the opposite, and in many ways, more sobering, conclusion that the soul, or the mind, is not a separate entity at all, but is profoundly and inseparably bound to the fate of our physical bodies. The first great and persistent challenge to the idea of a separate, non-physical soul is the problem of interaction. This is a logical puzzle that has haunted dualism since the time of Descartes himself. If the soul and the body are two fundamentally different kinds of substance, one non-physical, spaceless, and without mass, the other physical, located in space, and with mass, then how can they possibly interact? How can a completely non-physical event, like a decision made by the soul, cause a physical event, like the firing of a neuron in the brain that leads to the raising of your hand? This would seem to violate one of the most fundamental and well-established laws of our universe, the law of the conservation of energy. It would require a ghost-like, non-physical entity to somehow create energy out of nothing in the physical world. The 20th century philosopher Gilbert Ryle famously and mockingly called this dualist view the dogma of the ghost in the machine. The problem is that no one has ever been able to satisfactorily explain how the ghost can pull the levers of the machine. Beyond this logical puzzle, the most powerful and direct challenge to the idea of a separate soul comes from the overwhelming and ever-growing body of evidence from the field of neuroscience. If the soul is our true self, and the body is just a temporary and separate vessel, then we would expect our essential character, our memories, and our consciousness to be invulnerable to purely physical events. But this is the exact opposite of what we observe. The tragic case of Phineas Gage, the railroad foreman who suffered a catastrophic injury to the frontal lobe of his brain, is a stark and powerful testament to this. The physical damage to his brain did not just impair his body, it completely and permanently altered his very personality, his moral character, and his sense of self. This intimate and undeniable link between the physical brain and the qualities we attribute to the soul is a fact of our everyday lives. We know that chemical substances, from a simple cup of coffee to a powerful anesthetic, can profoundly alter our state of consciousness, our moods, and our very perception of reality. If our conscious self were a separate and independent entity, why would it be so helplessly and profoundly at the mercy of the chemical state of our physical brain? And modern brain imaging technology has shown us, with a breathtaking clarity, that every single mental event, every thought, every feeling, every memory, has a direct and observable physical correlate in the brain. There is no evidence of a single, solitary thought occurring without a corresponding pattern of neural activity. The symphony of our inner world seems to be perfectly and completely synchronized with the electrical and chemical activity of the orchestra of our brain. This has led the great majority of modern philosophers and scientists to the position of physicalism, the view that the mind and the body are not two separate things, but are two aspects of a single, unified, physical entity. In this view, the mind is what the brain does. Consciousness is not a separate substance, but an emergent property of a fantastically complex physical system. To understand this, we can return to the analogy of the wetness of water. The property of wetness is a real and observable phenomenon. But it is not a non-physical, wet soul that inhabits the H2O molecules. Wetness is simply what the H2O molecules do when they are arranged and are interacting in a particular way. The property of wetness cannot exist separately from the water molecules themselves. So it is with consciousness. Consciousness is a real and profound property, but it is a property of a living and functioning brain. It is what the neurons do when they are arranged and are interacting in the magnificent complexity of our central nervous system. And just as the wetness cannot exist without the water, this view concludes that our consciousness cannot exist without the living, functioning brain that gives rise to it. And so, we are left with two great and competing visions of our own being. The ancient, dualist vision gives us a profound sense of hope for an eternal existence, but it struggles to explain the undeniable and intimate connection between our minds and our brains. The modern, physicalist vision provides a powerful and scientifically coherent explanation for this connection, but it leads us to the sober and deeply humbling conclusion that our conscious self is a temporary and mortal phenomenon, a beautiful and fleeting song that is played, for a time, by our biological instrument. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, feel the profound and inseparable unity of your own being. Feel how a thought can cause a physical sensation in your body, and how a physical sensation can give rise to a feeling in your mind. See your body not as a prison for your consciousness, but as the sacred and miraculous instrument that makes your entire, conscious experience possible. In this view, to care for our bodies, to honor their needs and their wisdom, is not a mundane or a worldly concern. It is the most direct and the most honest spiritual practice we can ever engage in. Rest in a profound and peaceful mystery of your own, single, unified, and embodied existence. Part 6, Scientific Views. Is consciousness just the brain? Our journey into the great mystery of what follows death has so far taken us through the rich and varied landscapes of human belief, through the ancient visions of the afterlife and the great, linear, moral dramas of the Western religious traditions. These are the stories that have been born from our hopes, from our fears, and from the deep and powerful intuitions of the human heart. But in our modern age, a new and powerful voice has entered this ancient conversation. It is the voice of science, a voice that speaks not in the language of faith or of myth, but in the cool, clear, and sober language of evidence, of observation, and of the unyielding laws of the physical world. Tonight, we will turn our full attention to this scientific perspective, and we will ask, from a purely biological and physical standpoint, what is the relationship between our consciousness, our brain, and the possibility of life after death? The foundational principle upon which the entire edifice of modern science is built is the idea that the physical world is a causally closed system. This means that every physical event has a preceding physical cause. The movement of a planet, the chemical reaction in a test tube, the firing of a neuron in the brain, all of these are a part of an unbroken chain of physical causation that is governed by the consistent and discoverable laws of nature. From within this worldview, there is no room for a non-physical entity, ghost in the machine, to intervene and to alter the course of physical events. The working assumption of science, therefore, is that our minds and our consciousness must, in some way, be a part of this physical system, not something that exists outside of it. When we apply this principle to the human brain, we are led to a powerful and almost overwhelming body of evidence that suggests our consciousness is not just connected to the brain, but is entirely dependent upon it. The first great line of evidence is that of structural dependence. As we have explored, neuroscience has shown, with an incredible and ever-increasing precision, that our specific mental functions are tied to specific, physical structures in the brain. Your ability to see this world is dependent on your visual cortex. Your ability to form long-term memories is dependent on a small, seahorse-shaped structure called the hippocampus. And your very personality, your capacity for moral judgment and for social planning, is intimately linked to the health of your frontal lobes. If our consciousness were a separate and independent soul, merely using the brain as a kind of temporary vessel, we would be left with a profound and difficult question. Why would a purely physical injury to a small part of this vessel have such a devastating and specific effect on the very essence of the soul itself? The fact that a stroke can erase a person's ability to speak, or that a degenerative disease can unravel their most cherished memories, is a powerful piece of evidence for the idea that these mental faculties are not the properties of a separate soul, but are, in fact, the direct products of the brain's physical machinery. The second great line of evidence is that of chemical dependence. Our entire, subjective, inner world, with all its rich and varied emotional weather, is profoundly and inescapably influenced by the chemical environment of our brain. A small change in the level of a neurotransmitter like serotonin can plunge us into a deep depression or lift us into a state of heightened well-being. The introduction of an external chemical, an anesthetic, can completely and reliably switch our consciousness off, and its removal can switch it back on again. If our consciousness were a non-physical and independent entity, why would it be so helplessly at the mercy of these simple, material substances? The deep and intimate connection between our state of mind and our state of brain chemistry is a further testament to the idea that the two are not separate things, but are two aspects of a single, unified, biological process. And finally, there is the evidence of energetic dependence. The human brain is, for its size, the most energy-intensive organ in our body. It consumes a vast amount of oxygen and of glucose simply to maintain its operations. And the state of being conscious is a particularly costly and energy-hungry process. When the supply of this physical fuel is cut off from the brain, our conscious awareness fades in a matter of seconds. This tells us that consciousness is not a free-floating or an ethereal phenomenon. It is an active, demanding, and expensive biological process. It is the work that the brain does, and like all work, it requires energy. From these three great lines of evidence, the dependence on structure, on chemistry, and on energy, the mainstream scientific worldview arrives at a sober and powerful conclusion regarding the question of life after death. It concludes that our consciousness, our self, our is an emergent property of the living, functioning brain. It is the beautiful and complex symphony that is being played by a magnificent biological orchestra. And the moment of death, from a scientific perspective, is the moment of irreversible brain death. It is the moment that the orchestra ceases to function. The intricate structures are degraded, the delicate chemical balance is lost, and the flow of energy comes to a final and permanent halt. When the orchestra is gone, the symphony does not continue to play in some other realm. The process that produced it has ended, and so the symphony itself has ended, completely and finally. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, allow yourself to feel the profound and deep unity of your own, embodied being. Feel the truth that your every thought is a spark of electricity, that your every feeling is a chemical dance. See your body not as a crude and temporary prison for a separate spirit, but as the sacred, miraculous, and incredibly complex biological loom upon which the entire, rich tapestry of your conscious experience is being woven. Rest in a humbling and powerful piece of this scientific vision, a vision that sees us not as visitors in this physical world, but as an integral, inseparable, and beautiful expression of the great, unfolding, and creative power of the natural universe itself. The scientific story of the self as a great and beautiful symphony produced by the orchestra of the brain is a powerful, an elegant, and a deeply compelling one. It is a story that is grounded in a mountain of observable and repeatable evidence. And it leads, with a sober and almost unavoidable logic, to the conclusion that when the orchestra is destroyed, the music must end. And yet, for all of its power and its clarity, this is not the end of the scientific story. For science, in its truest and most honest form, is not a set of closed and final answers, but a constant and courageous process of inquiry. And even within the world of science itself, there are profound and persistent mysteries that this simple, physicalist story struggles to fully contain, great and unanswered questions that leave the door to other possibilities, however small, still open. The first and most formidable of these is the great, unsolved, and perhaps unsolvable mystery that we have returned to again and again, the hard problem of consciousness. The scientific model is a masterpiece of explaining the functions of the brain and the correlations between brain states and mental states. But it remains profoundly and completely silent on the question of how and why any of these physical processes should give rise to a subjective, first-person, inner world of experience. This is the great and glaring Achilles heel of a purely physicalist worldview. As long as we have no scientific theory for how the simple, physical matter of the brain can create the non-physical, private, and qualitative feeling of joy, or the experience of seeing the color red, we cannot, with absolute and final scientific certainty, conclude that consciousness is just a product of the brain. The possibility, however remote it may seem, must remain that consciousness is a more fundamental property of the universe, a property that our science has not yet learned how to measure or to understand. The ghost has not yet been fully exorcised from the machine. This great, explanatory gap has led some brave and brilliant scientists to look for an answer in the strangest and most counterintuitive of all scientific realms, the world of quantum mechanics. As we have seen, the quantum world is not the neat, deterministic, and clockwork world of classical physics. It is a world of potential, of probability, and of deep and mysterious connections that seem to transcend our normal understanding of space and of time. Some speculative, but serious, scientific theories have proposed that our own, classical brain may, in fact, be a kind of quantum computer, and that our consciousness is a product of these deep, quantum processes. One of the most famous of these is the theory proposed by the physicist Sir Roger Penrose and the anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff. They suggest that consciousness arises from quantum computations that are taking place within the tiny, protein structures inside our neurons, structures called microtubules. The profound and startling implication of this theory is that this quantum information, which they propose is the very substance of our consciousness or our soul, is not dependent on the biological body in the same way a classical, computational process is. They suggest that this quantum information is woven into the very geometry of space-time itself. And, according to the laws of quantum mechanics, this fundamental information cannot be destroyed. At the moment of death, they speculate, this quantum information is not annihilated. It is simply released from its temporary, biological home in the brain, and it returns to the great, cosmic whole, able to exist indefinitely in the fundamental fabric of the universe. This is, we must be clear, a highly speculative and controversial theory on the very fringe of mainstream science. But it is a genuine scientific hypothesis, a testament to the fact that the question of the survival of consciousness is not one that science has completely and finally closed. Beyond these theoretical possibilities, there is also the persistent and deeply puzzling evidence of certain, anomalous human experiences, most notably the near-death experience, or NDE. From a simple, physicalist perspective, a person who is clinically brain-dead is, for that time, not conscious. And yet, there are thousands upon thousands of consistent and well-documented cases of individuals who have returned from such states with clear and vivid memories of a conscious experience. Of floating above their own bodies, of witnessing the medical procedures being performed upon them, and of journeying to another realm of existence. The most challenging of these cases, from a purely scientific standpoint, are those in which the person is able to later report specific and verifiable details of events that occurred in the room while they were, by all medical and neurological measures, completely unconscious. The mainstream scientific explanation for these experiences is that they are a complex and powerful hallucination, a final and predictable burst of activity from a dying brain. And yet, this explanation does not yet fully and satisfactorily account for the richness, the cross-cultural consistency, and the verifiable, out-of-body aspects of some of the most dramatic of these cases. They remain a profound and beautiful scientific and philosophical puzzle, a hint that our current, simple model of brain activity equals consciousness may be incomplete. And so, we are left with a more nuanced and more humble scientific picture. The vast majority of the evidence, from our deep understanding of the brain, points to the conclusion that our conscious self is a temporary and mortal process that ends with the death of the body. And yet, the greatest and most honest of scientists will also admit that our understanding is not complete. The great, unsolved mystery of the hard problem, the strange and mind-bending possibilities of quantum physics, and the persistent and well-documented puzzle of anomalous experiences like NDE should give us all a profound sense of intellectual humility. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, see the world of science not as a cold and rigid system of final answers, but as a beautiful, ongoing, and open-ended process of inquiry. Rest in the knowledge that while science has given us a powerful and sobering story about our own mortal nature,
it has also revealed a universe that is far stranger, more mysterious, and more wondrous than we ever could have imagined. And it is in this great and beautiful mystery, a mystery that science itself has revealed to us, that the questions of our deepest hopes and our ultimate destiny can continue to live.
Part 7, Near-Death Experiences, Glimpses Beyond the Veil. Our long and shared journey into the mystery of death has so far taken us through the great landscapes of human belief, of philosophy, and of science. We have been left in a state of profound and humble uncertainty, accepting that from our position as living beings, the question of what lies beyond our final breath may be forever unanswerable. For all of human history, it has been said that death is the one undiscovered country from which no traveler ever returns. And yet, in our own modern age of advanced medical resuscitation, a new and startling kind of traveler has emerged. These are the people who have journeyed to the very brink of that final frontier, who have been declared clinically dead, and who have, against all odds, been brought back. And they have returned with stories, with strange, powerful, and often beautiful reports from the very edge of existence. Tonight, we will listen to these stories and ask, are these near-death experiences a genuine glimpse beyond the veil, or are they the final, complex, and beautiful dream of a dying brain? The first thing that must be understood about the near-death experience, or the NDE, is the profound and life-altering reality of the experience for the person who has it. It is not described as a dream, or a hallucination, or a simple state of confusion. In fact, it is often described by those who have had it as being more real than real, a state of consciousness so lucid, so coherent, and so intensely vibrant that our normal, waking life seems like a pale and faded shadow in comparison. While every experience is unique, researchers have discovered that these accounts, from people of all different ages, cultures, and religious backgrounds, often share a remarkable and consistent set of core features, a kind of archetypal journey to the threshold of death and back. This journey often begins with a profound out-of-body experience. The person feels their consciousness separating from their physical form. They find themselves floating, often near the ceiling, looking down with a sense of calm and a profound detachment at the scene below. They can see their own, lifeless body, and they can see the frantic and often grief-stricken efforts of the doctors and the nurses who are trying to save them. They report being able to hear the conversations in the room, to see the details of the medical instruments, and to feel not a sense of fear or a pain, but a deep and overwhelming sense of peace and of well-being. From this state of detached observation, a new stage of the journey often begins. The person feels themselves being pulled, as if by a gentle and irresistible force, into a dark space, which is most often described as a tunnel. This is not a frightening or a claustrophobic experience, but one of a rapid and effortless movement. And at the far end of this tunnel, there is a point of light. As the person draws closer, this light expands until it envelopes their entire being. It is described not as a harsh or a blinding physical light, but as a light that is, itself, a form of consciousness. It is a brilliant, golden white light that radiates a feeling of absolute, unconditional, and overwhelming love, a love that is more powerful and more pure than anything they have ever known. In the presence of this being of light, all of their earthly fears, and most especially their fear of death, are completely and permanently extinguished. It is often in the presence of this light that the next great stage of the NDE occurs, the life review. This is not a harsh and critical judgment, but a panoramic, and often instantaneous, re-experiencing of one's entire life. But it is a re-experiencing with a profound and transformative difference. The person sees every action they have ever taken, every word they have ever spoken, but they experience it not from their own perspective, but from the perspective of every other person they have ever interacted with. They feel the joy that their kindness has caused in others, and they feel the pain that their anger or their selfishness has inflicted. The great and overwhelming lesson of the life review, as it is almost universally reported, is that the only thing that truly matters in a human life, the only thing that has any enduring value in the final accounting, is the amount of love that we have given to the world. After this profound and life-altering lesson, the person often arrives at a kind of border or a boundary. They may see a beautiful landscape, a bridge or a wall, a point beyond which they know they cannot pass if they are to return to their earthly life. They are often told, either by the being of light or by a deceased relative who has come to greet them, that it is not yet their time. And then, often with a sense of great reluctance and of sadness at leaving a state of such profound peace and love, they feel themselves being pulled back, a rapid and often unpleasant return to their damaged and painful physical body. To return to the world of the living after such a profound and transformative journey is to be forever changed. The after effects of a genuine near-death experience are profound and remarkably consistent. The most powerful and the most common of these is the complete and total loss of the fear of death. The person no longer fears their own end because they feel that they now know, with an unshakable, experiential certainty, that their consciousness will survive the death of their body. This is often accompanied by a profound shift in their life's values. The pursuit of material wealth, of status, and of personal ambition is often seen as a trivial and unimportant game. It is replaced by a new and deep sense of purpose, a life dedicated to the cultivation of love, of compassion, and of service to others. And finally, the experience often leaves the person with a deep and abiding spiritual conviction that the entire universe is a single, interconnected, and benevolent whole, and that the fundamental reality that underlies all of existence is the very same, unconditional love that they experienced in the heart of the light. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, see these strange and beautiful stories not as a definitive proof of what lies beyond, but as a profound and powerful testament to the mystery of the human spirit. See them as a glimpse into the incredible and transformative power of an experience that lies at the very edge of our understanding. Rest in the profound and peaceful message that these travelers have brought back from that distant and mysterious shore, that our consciousness is a thing of great and enduring beauty, that the essence of a good life is the love that we give, and that the ultimate reality may be far more loving, more peaceful, and more magnificent than we, in our ordinary, waking state, can ever fully imagine. Having journeyed through the beautiful, profound, and often life-altering landscape of the near-death experience, and having listened with an open heart to the strange and wondrous stories of the travelers who have returned from that distant shore, we must now, with an equal sense of intellectual honesty and of gentle curiosity, turn to the other great and powerful story that seeks to explain this remarkable phenomenon. This is the story that is told not by the mystic or the spiritual seeker, but by the neuroscientist and the psychologist. It is a story that sees the near-death experience not as a journey into a world beyond, but as the final, and perhaps the most magnificent, creative masterpiece of the dying brain. From this scientific perspective, the near-death experience is not a glimpse into a metaphysical reality, but a profound and predictable set of subjective experiences that are generated by a brain that is undergoing a state of extreme and unusual stress. This view does not seek to dismiss the experience as unreal, for the experience is undeniably and profoundly real for the person having it, but it seeks to find the explanation for this reality in the known, physical, and chemical processes of our own biology. This is the great and sober counter-narrative, and it, too, is a story of profound and beautiful wonder. When we deconstruct the archetypal journey of the near-death experience, we find that each of its famous and consistent stages has a plausible, and in some cases, a well-supported, neurological explanation. The profound out-of-body experience, the feeling of floating above one's own body and observing the scene from a distance, can be seen as a disruption of a specific part of the brain called the temporoparietal junction. This is the area that is responsible for integrating our senses of sight and of touch to create our stable, ongoing sense of being a self that is located inside our bodies. When this region is disrupted, either by a lack of oxygen during a cardiac arrest or even by direct electrical stimulation in a laboratory, this stable sense of self can break down, creating the powerful and convincing illusion of floating freely in space. The famous journey through a dark tunnel towards a brilliant light can also be explained by the process of the brain beginning to shut down. As the brain is starved of oxygen, the visual cortex, the part of our brain that processes sight, can begin to lose its function, starting from the periphery and moving inward. This would create a progressive narrowing of our field of vision, a tunnel vision, with a final, bright spot of activity remaining in the center. The brilliant and beautiful light itself could be the result of a massive and chaotic flood of excitatory neurotransmitters that the brain releases in a final burst of activity before it goes silent. The profound and overwhelming feelings of peace, of bliss, and of unconditional love that are so central to the experience can be understood as the brain's own, ultimate, and most powerful act of self-comfort. In a moment of extreme physical trauma and impending death, the brain releases a powerful, internal cocktail of its own, natural neurochemicals, including endorphins, which are the body's own, potent dopiants. This chemical cascade can produce a profound sense of euphoria, of detachment, and of a complete and total absence of all fear and all pain. And the panoramic life review, the experience of seeing one's entire life flash before one's eyes, can be explained by the stimulation of the temporal lobes, the regions of the brain that are so deeply involved in the storage and the retrieval of our long-term memories. The process of the brain's systems beginning to fail could trigger a random and rapid firing of these memory circuits, creating a great and final cascade of a lifetime of memories. This leads us to the dying brain hypothesis. This is the great, unifying, scientific story that attempts to explain the near-death experience as a whole. It proposes that the NDE is the brain's final, heroic, and profoundly creative act. The brain, even as it is failing, is, as we have seen, a meaning-making and a storytelling machine. The dying brain hypothesis suggests that it takes all of the strange and chaotic sensations of its own, final dissolution, the failing vision, the chemical rush of euphoria, the random firing of memories, and it does what it does best. It weaves them all together into a single, coherent, meaningful, and psychologically comforting narrative. The NDE, in this view, is the beautiful and merciful story that the brain tells itself to make the terrifying and chaotic experience of its own end less frightening. And yet, for all of its explanatory power, we must, with an equal sense of intellectual honesty, acknowledge that this scientific model is not yet complete. There are aspects of the near-death experience that it still struggles to fully contain. The most challenging of these are the veridical cases, the well-documented instances where patients are able to report specific and objective details of events that occurred in the room, or even in distant rooms, while they were, by all medical measures, clinically dead, with no measurable brain activity. And many report their experience not as a confused and chaotic hallucination, but as a state of hyperlucidity and of heightened clarity, a state that seems to be the very opposite of what one would expect from a failing and disorganized brain. These are the persistent and beautiful puzzles that remind us that our scientific understanding of consciousness is still in its infancy. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, you are left with two great and powerful stories. One is the story of the spirit, which sees the near-death experience as a genuine and hopeful journey beyond the veil. The other is the story of the brain, which sees it as the final and most beautiful masterpiece of our own, mortal biology. You do not need to choose between them. The ultimate truth of this profound and beautiful mystery may lie somewhere in between, or in a place that our current understanding cannot yet reach. Rest in the profound and peaceful knowledge that the human experience, in its fullness, is a thing of great and wondrous mystery, and that even in its final moments, it is a source of beauty, of wonder, and of a deep and abiding peace. Part 8, Materialism versus Dualism, Competing Explanations. Our entire, long and winding journey into the great mystery of life after death, with all its questions of hope, of fear, and of meaning, ultimately rests upon a single, foundational, and deeply philosophical choice. It is a choice about the very nature of reality itself, a choice between two great and competing stories that humanity has been telling itself since the very dawn of thought. The first of these stories is that of dualism, the belief that reality is composed of two fundamentally different kinds of things, the physical, tangible world of matter, and the non-physical, intangible world of the mind, the spirit, or the soul. The second is the story of materialism, the belief that there is only one, single, unified reality, and that reality is the physical, material world. Tonight, we will begin our exploration of this great divide by journeying into the ancient, powerful, and deeply intuitive world of dualism. The belief that we are more than just our physical bodies is perhaps the most natural and instinctive of all our philosophical intuitions. It is a belief that is born from the direct and undeniable evidence of our own, lived, first-person experience. The world out there, the world of tables, of trees, and of stones, seems to be a public, objective, and physical reality. But our inner world, the world of our thoughts, our feelings, our memories, and our dreams, feels like it is of a completely different and more ethereal kind. Our thoughts have no weight. Our feelings have no location in space. Our consciousness itself, the very awareness that is experiencing this moment, feels like a private, non-physical, and indivisible presence. As we have explored, the very language we use reflects this deep, intuitive split. We do not say, "I am a body," we say, "I have a body," as if the I is a kind of owner or a pilot, and the body is a separate vessel that we inhabit. This deep intuition is given a powerful and vivid reinforcement every single night of our lives, in the world of our dreams. The dream world is a direct and undeniable experience of a reality that seems to be made of pure mind. In a dream, we can fly, we can pass through walls, we can experience a world that is not bound by the familiar and rigid laws of physical matter. The dream is a nightly reminder that our consciousness is a powerful, world-building force, and it gives us an intimate and personal experience of a seemingly non-physical dimension of our own being. This intuitive, dualistic vision of reality was given its first great and systematic philosophical expression by the ancient Greek philosopher Plato. For Plato, this was not just an intuition, it was a logical necessity. As we have seen, he believed that the physical world we perceive with our senses is a realm of constant change, of imperfection, and of decay. It is a world of shadows. But our minds, our reason, have the remarkable ability to grasp perfect, eternal, and unchanging truths, such as the truths of mathematics or of morality. And since like can only know like, Plato argued that the part of us that can know these eternal, non-physical truths must, itself, be an eternal and non-physical entity. This is the Platonic soul. For Plato, the soul is our true self, an immortal and indivisible substance that has its true home not in this messy and imperfect physical world, but in a higher, transcendent realm of pure and perfect ideas, the world of the forms. The body is merely a temporary prison, a shadow that the soul is, for a time, unfortunately attached to. The entire purpose of a philosophical life, for Plato, was to learn to care for one's soul, to purify it from the distracting and corrupting influences of the body's desires, and to prepare it for its eventual and joyful release from its physical prison at the moment of death. More than 2,000 years later, the French philosopher René Descartes would re-establish this dualistic vision as the very foundation of modern thought. Through his famous method of radical doubt, he arrived at the one, unshakable certainty of his own existence as a thinking thing, a consciousness. And he argued, with a cool and powerful logic, that this thinking self must be a substance that is completely separate and distinct from his physical body. His argument rested on the idea of their different and mutually exclusive properties. The body, like all physical objects, is, by its very nature, extended in space and is divisible. You can always, in principle, cut a physical object in half. But the mind, the conscious I, has no such properties. It is not extended in space, and it is indivisible. You cannot have half of a thought or half of a feeling of sadness. Since the mind and the body have these two, completely different and incompatible essential natures, Descartes concluded that they must be two, completely different and separate substances. This great, dualist story, as articulated by Plato and by Descartes, has been the dominant and most powerful narrative in the Western world for most of its history. Its appeal is immense. It honors our deepest and most persistent intuition that our inner world is fundamentally different from the outer one. It provides a powerful and elegant solution to the hard problem of consciousness by simply proposing that consciousness is not a product of matter at all, but is a fundamental and irreducible property of a different kind of substance. And most importantly, for our current inquiry, it provides the necessary and logical foundation for the possibility of life after death. If the soul is a separate, non-physical, and immortal substance, then the death and the decomposition of the physical body is an event that it can, and does, survive. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, feel the truth of this ancient and powerful perspective in your own direct experience. Feel the profound difference between the solid, physical reality of the world around you and the fluid, private, and non-physical reality of your own inner world of thought and of feeling. Rest in the profound and comforting mystery that has been at the heart of the human spiritual and philosophical quest for millennia, the idea that you are not just a temporary, biological machine, but that you are, in your deepest essence, a timeless, indestructible, and conscious soul. The great, dualist vision of a non-physical soul inhabiting a temporary, physical body is a story of immense power and of deep, intuitive comfort. It is a story that has been the spiritual and philosophical bedrock of our world for millennia, offering a powerful reason to believe in our own, enduring and immortal nature. And yet, the rise of the modern, scientific worldview, a worldview that is built upon the principles of physical evidence and of causal law, has presented a formidable and, for many, a conclusive challenge to this ancient and beautiful picture. This is the story of materialism, the idea that there is only one, single, unified reality, and that reality is the physical world of matter and of energy. The first great challenge that the materialist perspective poses to the dualist is a purely logical one, a problem that has haunted the idea of a separate soul since its very inception. This is the problem of interaction. If the soul, our mind, is a truly non-physical, non-spatial, and non-energetic substance, then how can it possibly interact with the physical, spatial, and energetic substance of our brain? How can a desire, which has no physical properties, cause a physical neuron to fire? How can a choice, made by a non-physical ghost, move the great, physical machine of the body? This would seem to require the constant violation of the most fundamental law of our physical universe, the law of the conservation of energy, as a non-physical entity would have to be creating physical energy out of nothing. Materialism, in its elegant simplicity, avoids this problem entirely. It does not need to build a mysterious and unexplained bridge between two different worlds, because it proposes that there is only one world to begin with. Beyond this logical puzzle, however, lies the great and ever-growing mountain of empirical evidence from the sciences of the brain. This is the evidence of our mind's profound and undeniable dependence on the physical body. As we have seen, the classical dualist view holds that the soul is our true and essential self. But if this were the case, we would expect this self to be a stable and invulnerable entity, immune to the fortunes of its temporary, physical vessel. And yet, the evidence from neuroscience shows us, with a stark and often tragic clarity, that this is not the case. A physical injury to the brain can completely and permanently alter the very essence of a person's character and their moral compass. The chemical state of the brain, influenced by hormones, by substances, or by illness, can profoundly shape our every feeling, from the depths of despair to the heights of ecstasy. And the simple, physical process of aging can slowly and inexorably degrade the very memories that constitute our sense of an enduring identity. If the soul is the independent and immortal pilot of the ship, why is it so completely at the mercy of the mechanical and chemical state of the ship itself? Furthermore, the story of evolution presents another profound challenge to the idea of a separately created, non-physical soul. The fossil record in our own genetic history show us a long and gradual story of the evolution of the brain, from the simple neural nets of our most ancient ancestors to the magnificent complexity of the human neocortex. And as the brain has grown in its complexity, so too has the complexity of the behaviors that we associate with the mind. This suggests that the mind is not a separate and timeless entity that was inserted into the body at some point in our history. It suggests, instead, that the mind is a biological trait, a property that has evolved, slowly and gradually, in lockstep with the evolution of the brain that supports it. From all of this evidence, the materialist worldview draws a powerful and coherent conclusion. The mind, or the soul, is not a separate substance. It is an emergent property of a fantastically complex physical system. As we have explored, a single molecule of water is not wet. But when trillions of these molecules interact, the property of wetness emerges. A single neuron is not conscious. But when 100 billion of these neurons are connected in the intricate and recursive network of the human brain, the property of consciousness, emerges. The mind is the name we give to the incredibly complex process that the living brain is performing. It is the software that is running on the biological hardware. And like any software, it cannot exist without the hardware that is running it. This view does not deny the reality of our mental lives. The symphony that an orchestra plays is a real, beautiful, and profound phenomenon. But it cannot exist without the physical orchestra that is playing it. When the orchestra is gone, the symphony is gone. And so, from this materialist perspective, the conclusion regarding an afterlife is a sober and an unavoidable one. When the brain, through injury, illness, or old age, ceases to function, the complex, emergent process of consciousness that we call the self also ceases. The song is over, and the orchestra is silent. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, allow yourself to feel the deep and profound unity of your own embodied being. Feel the truth that your every thought is a spark of electricity in your brain, that your every feeling is a dance of chemicals. See your body not as a crude and temporary prison for a separate and more real spirit, but as the sacred and miraculous physical ground from which your entire conscious experience arises. In this view, our physical lives, our bodies, and our connection to the natural world are not a distraction from a higher, spiritual purpose. They are the only home we will ever know, the one and only sacred stage upon which the beautiful and fleeting miracle of our conscious lives is allowed to unfold. Part 9. The Fear of Death. Does belief in an afterlife help us live? Our long and often sobering journey into the question of life after death has led us through the stark, physicalist conclusion of the scientific worldview and the elegant but challenging arguments of the dualist philosophers. We are left, as we so often are, in a state of profound and beautiful mystery, without a final and certain answer. But for most of human history, and for the vast majority of human beings living today, this question is not an open, philosophical inquiry. It is answered by a deep, powerful, and often unshakable faith in the reality of a life beyond this one. This brings us to a new and deeply psychological question. What is the function of this belief? How does the belief in an afterlife shape the way we experience our one mortal life? Does it, in the end, help us to live better? To understand the immense power of a belief in an afterlife, we must first return to the raw and primal reality of our own human condition. As we have explored, we are beings who are burdened and blessed with the unique and often terrifying awareness of our own future and inevitable death. This awareness can give rise to a profound and sometimes paralyzing existential anxiety, the fear of our own personal annihilation, the terror of dissolving into a great and silent nothingness. The belief in an afterlife is, first and foremost, the oldest, the most powerful, and the most universally effective antidote to this fundamental fear. It is a grand and beautiful story that speaks directly to our terror of the void and whispers a single, profoundly comforting word: continuity. It is a narrative that transforms the brutal, biological finality of death from a solid and unbreachable wall into a mysterious and hopeful doorway. In the face of the seeming absurdity of a brief and often painful life that ends in a final and absolute extinction, the belief in an afterlife offers a sense of ultimate and enduring meaning. It tells us that our earthly existence is not a meaningless and random fragment, but is a single, crucial, and purposeful chapter in a much larger, and perhaps eternal, story. This sense of a larger, cosmic story provides a powerful framework for cosmic justice, a deep and abiding answer to the suffering and the unfairness that we so often witness in the world. A belief in a final judgment, whether it is in the form of the heavenly and hellish realms of the Western traditions or the impersonal, moral law of karma in the East, assures us that our moral choices have an ultimate and an everlasting significance. It is a promise that in the end, the scales will be balanced, that virtue will be rewarded, that suffering will be redeemed, and that the universe is not a morally indifferent or a chaotic place, but is, in its deepest essence, just. This belief can be a source of immense resilience, allowing us to endure the trials and the tribulations of this one life with a sense of hope and of trust in a greater, unseen order. Perhaps the most intimate and the most powerful of all the psychological benefits of this belief is the profound comfort that it offers us in the face of our most painful of all human experiences, the grief of losing someone we love. As we have seen, grief is the form that love takes when its object is gone. And the most painful aspect of this grief is often its seeming finality. A belief in an afterlife transforms this final and absolute goodbye into a temporary and bearable "see you later." It is the profound and deeply comforting hope of an eventual reunion. It is the belief that the bonds of love are, in fact, stronger than the reality of death, and that the person we have lost is not gone forever, but is waiting for us, in a different and perhaps more beautiful place. This belief allows us to maintain an ongoing, if altered, relationship with the deceased, through prayer, through memory, and through the sustaining power of this sacred hope. It is a balm for the deepest and most incurable of all human wounds. And so, we see that the belief in an afterlife is a fantastically powerful and sophisticated psychological architecture. It is a great and ancient fortress that humanity has built to provide shelter from the cold and terrifying winds of our own mortality. It provides a sense of meaning, of purpose, of justice, and of hope, and it is a profound and beautiful testament to the creative, meaning-making power of the human spirit in the face of life's greatest and most final mystery. As you drift now into the quiet and healing space of sleep, reflect on the great and ancient stories of what comes next. See them not just as claims about a future world, but as a powerful and compassionate response to the deepest needs of the human heart in this world. See them as a testament to our enduring refusal to believe that our love, our consciousness, and our deep sense of justice are merely a fleeting and accidental dream. Rest in the profound and peaceful comfort that these great and hopeful stories have provided to countless generations of our ancestors, and to billions of our fellow human beings, in the face of our shared and beautiful, mortal condition. Having felt the profound and powerful psychological comfort that a belief in an afterlife can provide, its great and beautiful promise of continuity, of ultimate justice, and of a final, joyful reunion, we must now, with an equal sense of philosophical honesty, turn to look at the other side of this ancient coin. We must ask a difficult, and for some, an uncomfortable, question. While this belief is a powerful and healing balm for our deepest fears, does it, at times, come with a hidden cost? And is it the only path to living a courageous, meaningful, and motivated life in the full and clear-eyed awareness of our own mortality? The first great philosophical critique that has been leveled against a heavy and single-minded focus on a future, heavenly world is that it can, at times, lead to a subtle but profound devaluation of this one. If our one, brief, and precious earthly life is seen as merely a short and often painful prelude to an eternal and blissful existence, that it can begin to feel less like a home to be cherished and more like a waiting room to be endured. The urgent and pressing problems of this world, the problems of social injustice, of environmental destruction, of human suffering, can seem less important when viewed against the vast and infinite backdrop of an eternal paradise. And the simple, beautiful, and fleeting pleasures of this world, the taste of a fresh piece of fruit, the warmth of the sun, the joy of a shared conversation, can be overlooked in our impatient longing for the greater and more permanent joys of a world that is yet to come. This is the great risk of an overzealous focus on the afterlife, that in our desire for a future paradise, we may neglect to fully inhabit and to fully love the beautiful, if imperfect, world that is right here, right now. This critique has given rise to another, equally powerful, and profoundly life-affirming path for living a meaningful life. This is the path of the secular humanist, the existentialist, the one who chooses to find all of their meaning, all of their purpose, and all of their joy within the beautiful and tragic finitude of this one, mortal life. This path begins not with a denial of the afterlife, but with a simple and courageous acceptance of a profound and humble uncertainty. It is a path that chooses to build its house of meaning not on the foundation of a belief about a future world, but on the solid and undeniable ground of the world we are in right now. From this perspective, the value of a life is not derived from its eternal duration, but from its precious and unrepeatable scarcity. As we have explored, it is the very fact that our time is limited that gives our choices their weight and their significance. It is the fact that our moments are fleeting that makes them so poignant and so beautiful. We can think of a human life as being like a single, magnificent, and perfectly composed piece of music. Its beauty and its meaning are contained entirely within its own, finite structure, in its beginning, its middle, and its final, resolving chord. The promise that the song will be played again, on a loop, for all eternity, does not add to its beauty. It is the fact that it is a single, complete, and unrepeatable performance that makes it a masterpiece. So where, then, does one find a sense of purpose and a motivation for living a good life, without the promise of a final reward or the fear of a final punishment? The answer is that the meaning is to be found in the journey itself. It is the meaning that we find in the profound and beautiful experience of love and of connection, the joy of sharing this brief journey with our fellow mortal travelers. It is the meaning that we find in creativity and in contribution, the deep and lasting satisfaction of leaving this world a slightly more beautiful, more just, or more knowledgeable place than we found it. And it is the meaning that we find in the simple, yet profound, act of living with authenticity, of being true to our own, self-created values, and of facing the beautiful and tragic reality of our existence with a clear-eyed and courageous dignity. This leads us to a different, but no less powerful, kind of courage in the face of death. The courage of the believer is the great and profound courage to have faith in a beautiful and hopeful mystery. But the courage of the non-believer is an equally great and profound courage. It is the courage to face the possibility of a final and absolute end, of a complete and total annihilation of the self, and to live a life of love, of joy, and of meaning anyway. It is the courage to find our motivation not in a promise for the future, but in a deep and abiding love for the present. And so we see that these two great paths, the path of faith in a life to come and the path of finding meaning in this one, finite life, are not as different as they may first appear. They are two different and equally powerful human responses to the same fundamental challenge: how to live a good and a meaningful life in the full awareness of our own mortality. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, know that the ultimate and most effective answer to the fear of death is not to be found in a particular set of beliefs about the future, but in the quality of the attention and the love that you bring to your present. For whether you see this life as the first and most important chapter of an eternal story, or whether you see it as the one, single, and complete and beautiful novel that you will ever have, the task remains exactly the same. The task is to live it well. Rest in the profound and unifying peace that comes from this simple and powerful truth. Heart 10. The mystery endures. Can we ever truly know? We have now arrived at the final reflection in our long and shared journey into the meaning of death. We began by confronting our own deep and primal fear of the end. We have traveled through the great, ancient maps of the afterlife, from the sunlit paradise of the Egyptians to the shadowy underworld of the Greeks. We have sat with the vast, cyclical, and multi-life visions of the Eastern traditions, and we have contemplated the linear, moral, and eternally consequential drama of the West. We have weighed the philosophical arguments for an immortal soul against the sober, scientific evidence for a mind that is born from, and dies with, the brain. And after all of these inquiries, after all of these stories, all of these theories, and all of these hopes, we are left standing, at the very end, in a place of profound, of beautiful, and perhaps of permanent, uncertainty. This brings us to our final question. Can we, as living, mortal beings, ever truly know what lies beyond the veil of death, or is this the one great mystery that we are destined to live with, unanswered? The first and most fundamental reason that this question may be forever beyond our grasp is the very nature of experience itself. All of our knowledge, in the end, is built upon a foundation of experience, whether it is the direct, sensory experience of the world, or the shared, reported experience of others. But the state of being dead is, by its very definition, the one experience from which no one has ever returned to give a clear, a coherent, and a verifiable report. It is the great, undiscovered country, a frontier from which there is no coming back. We have the powerful and deeply moving accounts of those who have had near-death experiences, but as we have seen, these moments, as profound as they are, remain on the very threshold of the mystery, and their ultimate meaning is a matter of profound and personal interpretation, not of objective and universal proof. The final, central truth of what it is like to be dead is a truth that is, by its very nature, hidden from the living. Our most powerful and trusted tool for understanding the objective world, the method of science, also falls silent before this great question. The power of science lies in its ability to observe, to measure, to test, and to falsify hypotheses about the physical, material world. But the afterlife, if it exists at all, is, by its very definition, a non-physical, and perhaps a non-material, state of being. It is a reality that lies outside the jurisdiction of our scientific instruments. Science can, with a heartbreaking precision, describe the process of a body dying, but it cannot, with its current tools, tell us anything at all about the fate of the consciousness that once inhabited that body. To ask science to prove or to disprove the existence of an afterlife is to ask it to perform a task for which it was not designed, like asking a telescope to measure the beauty of a poem. Even our most powerful, internal tool, the faculty of pure reason, seems to lead us not to a final answer, but to a profound and enduring impasse. As we have explored, the great philosophical arguments for and against the survival of the soul are both powerful, coherent, and, in their own way, deeply compelling. The dualist can, with a clear and elegant logic, argue for the existence of a non-physical and immortal self. And the materialist can, with an equally powerful and evidentially grounded logic, argue that the self is an emergent property of the brain that must perish with it. The fact that brilliant and honest minds have been debating this very question for more than 2,000 years, without arriving at a final and universal consensus, is a powerful testament to the idea that reason alone may not be capable of solving this great riddle. We are left, then, in a state of profound and inescapable epistemic humility. It is not that we do not yet know the answer. It may be that we cannot know the answer. For most of the other great questions of our existence, the statement, "I don't know," is a temporary one, a sign of a problem that is waiting to be solved, a frontier that is waiting to be explored. But for this one, ultimate question, the statement, "I don't know," may be the final, the most honest, and the most wise of all possible human positions. It is a recognition of the limits of our own, finite, and mortal minds in the face of an infinite and perhaps eternal mystery. To truly accept this state of not knowing is not an easy thing. Our minds are hungry for certainty, and we are often deeply uncomfortable with ambiguity, especially on a question of such profound and personal importance. It is this very discomfort that so often leads us to cling, with a fierce and dogmatic certainty, to one particular story, and to close our minds to all other possibilities. But to live in the question, to make our home in the heart of the mystery itself, is to choose a different, and perhaps a more courageous, path. As you drift now into the quiet of the night, allow yourself to let go of the anxious and often futile search for a final and certain answer to this great question. You do not need to solve the mystery of death. It is enough to simply stand before it with a sense of reverence, of humility, and of profound and open-ended wonder. Rest in the quiet and courageous peace that comes not from having the final answer, but from a deep and honest acceptance that you are a finite being in the presence of a great and sacred mystery. Having stood in the quiet and humbling recognition that the final truth of what lies beyond death may be forever unknowable to us, having come face to face with the limits of our own human faculties in the presence of this great and ultimate mystery, we are now free to ask the final, and in many ways, the most beautiful and most important question of our entire series. If the purpose of our inquiry is not to arrive at a final and certain answer, then what is the meaning of the question itself? What if this profound and inescapable uncertainty is not a flaw in our condition, but is, in fact, a sacred and essential gift? What is the deep and life-altering meaning that can be found in the very fact that we are not meant to know the final answer? The first great gift that this profound uncertainty offers us is that it creates the very space in which our most cherished and most human virtues can grow. Consider the quality of faith. Faith, in its deepest and most powerful sense, is not the belief in something that has been proven to be true, that is simply knowledge. True faith is an act of trust, of commitment, and of love in the face of a great and profound mystery. If we had definitive, scientific proof of the existence of an afterlife, there would be no need for faith. It would simply be another established fact about the universe, like our knowledge that the Earth orbits the Sun. The great and silent mystery of what comes next is the very ground in which the seed of faith is planted. The unknowability of the destination is what makes the trust we place in our chosen path a beautiful and a meaningful act. so it is with the quality of hope. Hope is not the certainty that things will turn out well. It is the courageous and defiant choice to orient our hearts toward a positive and beautiful possibility in the face of an unknown and uncertain future. It is the virtue that thrives in the space between despair and certainty. The fact that we do not know our final fate is what makes the act of hoping a powerful and necessary part of a resilient and a good life. It is the choice to believe in the light, even when we are in a dark and unknown room. This ultimate uncertainty is also the very foundation upon which a truly profound and authentic moral life can be built. As we have seen, the human heart has found two great and noble paths to a virtuous life in the face of its own mortality. The first is the path of the believer, who lives a life of compassion, of justice, and of love, in the sacred hope that this life is a worthy preparation for a life that is yet to come. Their morality is a beautiful and powerful act of faith. The second is the path of the non-believer, the secular humanist, who, in the absence of any promise of an afterlife, concludes that this one, brief, and finite existence is the only chance we have to create a just, a beautiful, and a loving world. Their morality is an equally beautiful and powerful act of humanistic courage. The profound and beautiful truth that our uncertainty reveals is that both of these paths, though they begin from different and seemingly opposing premises, arrive at the very same destination. They arrive at a life that is dedicated to the reduction of suffering and the cultivation of love. The great mystery, in its refusal to give us a single, final answer, allows for a multitude of different, but equally beautiful and equally ethical, ways of being human. And finally, the unknowability of our final destination is the most powerful and the most urgent of all possible invitations to be fully and completely present in the one and only reality that we can ever truly know, the reality of the here and now. If we do not know what tomorrow will bring, or what, if anything, lies beyond the veil of death, then the only sane, the only wise, and the only truly logical response is to inhabit this one, present moment with our full and our undivided attention. The mystery of the future is what makes the gift of the present so unbelievably and so heartbreakingly precious. It is the ultimate and most powerful antidote to taking our lives for granted. And so we come to the end of our long and shared journey. The ultimate meaning of death is to be found not in an answer about what comes next, but in the way the great, unanswered question shapes the life we are living right now. The mystery of death is not a problem to be solved. It is a teacher that instructs us on how to live. And its lessons are simple and profound. It teaches us to be humble, for we are finite beings in the face of an infinite mystery. It teaches us to be courageous, for we must build our lives on a foundation of faith and of hope, not of certainty. And it teaches us, above all else, to be present, to be grateful, and to be loving, for this one, beautiful, and fleeting life is the only true and certain gift we will ever have. As you drift now into the final, peaceful close of this series of reflections, allow yourself to rest in the heart of this great and sacred mystery. You do not need to have a final answer. It is enough to have lived the question with an open, a curious, and a compassionate heart. The ultimate peace is to be found not in the certainty of a single and final destination, but in the beautiful and open-ended nature of the journey itself. To live a good and a loving life is the most profound and the most beautiful answer we can ever give to the great and silent question that awaits us all.